Welcome to another episode of Global Code. We go beyond the buzzwords to explore real world tech solutions for and with everybody everywhere in the age of AI. Today, we were really excited because we have Jess Holbrook with us. And of course, my co hosts, Shadan and Ashish. And so we're going to get started. But before we actually move into any questions, we want to do a little bit of a bio. You got to get to know Jess Holbrook a little bit here. He was the director of UX research for the generative AI team at Meta. And before that, director and head of UX research for responsible AI at Meta as well. He got a start in human AI research at Google about 10 years ago, where he was the founder and lead of Google's People Plus AI research group pair. And prior to joining Google, he was a UX researcher at Amazon and Microsoft. He's done the rounds. He's done the tech rounds, clearly. He received his PhD in psychology from the University of Oregon and a BS in psychology from the University of Washington. We are so excited to have you here. And wait, you've got this amazing fun fact of yours. Is the rapper T.I. the only celebrity that you've met, is what I want to know.
I don't know if he's the only one, but he's definitely the one that I remember the most. And that's the one that stands out to me for sure.
Okay, so what happened? Tell us the story.
Yeah. So the story is when I was working at Google and working on, what we would call human-centered AI or is starting to be called responsible AI. There was somebody I worked with, Annie Baptiste, who was like, hey, TI is coming to the office down in San Francisco to check out a couple of things. Would you come down and do a talk on some of the bias and some of the machine learning models? We've been doing these talks around Google. And I said, yeah, sure. I was like, that sounds like fun. My flight's delayed multiple times. I barely get down there. The whole schedule is totally thrown. So I don't even actually get to present anything to him. And they're in there, but if you stick around, he's still going to come around. And so I was like, yeah, I still want to meet him, And so we just came by and I have this picture of me, shaking his hand, saying hi, and me telling him I came from Seattle to San Francisco to see him. And he kind of has this like hilarious shocked look on his face at me telling him that. And then we do the picture where he looks very cool and I look like an idiot next to him. Yeah, super nice guy. He invited me to his show that night.
Oh,
I had to fly out, which I kind of regret. I probably should have gone to the show. Yeah, that's what to say. It's playing. Yeah, it was like some big show he was doing in Oakland, I want to say, or something like that. And I was like, I probably should have gone to that show. But I had to get home.
so you didn't try to drop some beats with him in the moment?
No. There was actually there was another person I remember who was very cringily trying to get him to buy into his business or his like angle, and I
Oh,
was like,
no.
I'm really not going to do that, and I'm just going to thank him for his time and be on my way.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, people can't help it, man.
I haven't had that exciting of a celebrity encounter. In fact, I've had none. So I'm excited that at least one of us have. I bet you Shadan has.
I
Have
actually
you?
have a T. I actually have a Ti one.
What?
Well connected.
That.
Ti is the great connector.
Yeah, he's a special guy. Yeah, I snuck into a club with him. Now he didn't know that I snuck in with him. I just got really close behind him, and security at the club thought that I was his personal security. So
I knew there was a story.
great times.
Oh man, that means you got a little big fella, you got a little look to you where they're like, all right, yeah, he looks like he could
Conceivably,
eyes security.
they probably just thought I knew martial arts or something. I don't know, but
So in other words, if I ever need backup, you're the person I need to call. That's the point of the story.
especially if it's to sneak into a club. Yes.
There you go. Okay, I'm going to pass the ball over to Ashish, who's going to get us started off.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Salima. Nice to meet you, Jess. Speaking of TI, now it's the next best thing, I guess, AI. We'll start with the more basic question as to you have a human-centered design background, right? So you came up as a UX researcher, that's where you started your career. What motivated you to go to the space of AI? And before you answer that, and this is kind of a multi-part question, how do you define responsible AI?
Yeah. 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 So it was, I always think it's interesting 'cause, like, I got interested in AI and learned everything I've learned on the job. And I say that because I work with people who are getting their PhDs in AI in the 80s, and they've been working on it for decades. And so felt like a real newcomer. I was at Google at the time, and I was actually working on the cloud platform team, which was kind of exploding. Like it was like, oh, this is the hot new thing. This is like the wave, and everyone was kind of jumping on board. And there was a person came over, an engineering lead, who gave a talk at Google and kind of was laying out this, explaining what had just happened with like AlexNet and some of the deep learning that has started to get working, and really was kind of painting this vision of the future that really incorporated a lot of UX and humanity and social considerations. This person is Blaise Aguirre, or the Arcus, if people know them. And I was really taken by it. And in Google fashion, especially back then, you still could really do 20% projects. So I said, hey, I want a 20% on your team, even though it was him and 10 engineers. And I kind of started working on that a bunch and getting more and more interested in it. And as 20% projects go, or kind of went back then, that my 20% project became my 100% project. And I moved over. And so, it was me and Blaze and like 10 engineers. To my knowledge, I was the first user experience person in that smaller group that at the time was called the machine intelligence team. I just found the whole thing extremely fascinating, both from a science and product point of view. So my background's in social psychology. So obviously anything AI or, hey, technology is going to start interacting with us more like people interact with us was really interesting to me. And then I just found it super fascinating from a product perspective as well, as like, okay, well then what do we build given these new capabilities? And from there, I just kind of followed my curiosity, to be honest, in a lot of ways. And I still, I got into AI that way, but I always say like, I'm not sleepwalking. Like I check in regularly of like, do I want to still be here, or is it time for something different? And I still find it really fascinating. It is interesting though, how big it's gotten, because I always tell people it's kind of like your favorite band getting really big. Like part of you is like really excited and it's kind of awesome, but part of you is like, oh man, like them. We were into it back when it was like a little scrappier, a little smaller group,
Mm.
And so, but yeah, I mean, it just happened in that kind of moment of inspiration and following the curiosity.
Oh, pretty cool. So how do you define responsible AI, right? So you started with AI,
Yeah.
and now we are in this age of responsible AI. I mean, I don't think that existed maybe 10 years ago.
Yeah.
So how would you define it, and what has changed over time?
Yeah. I mean, first I'll say like, there's this never ending thing of how do you define AI, let alone
I know.
responsible AI. And, AI is, not casting any, shade or anything on people that coined terms decades ago, but it's just like a really bad term for, what is actually happening and what it's become. But it's one we're kind of stuck with, to be honest. I think is what people usually mean when they refer to AI, in the practical sense, is the prediction of something. So the systems predict things. They predict, what video a person might want to watch next. They predict with high accuracy if an image includes a particular object or not. The LLMs, predict the next word in a sentence autoregressively. Now we have models that can, predict what the next 5, 10, 30 seconds or more of a song might sound like. And, we have some that can predict, what the structure of proteins likely look like given other signals. So I always think I think of it more of prediction. There's all these clunky terms, like you could call it, like when I think about humans and AI models, AI models are created through mostly data from humans. So it's a form of collective intelligence in a way. And, it's kind of like collective prediction, collective intelligence. I keep getting back to the term like augmented intelligence, which would be better. You don't have to change the acronym, which would probably be actually pretty cool. And then we really started, way back way back is like 10 years ago, but it feels like a lifetime. We started thinking about, we really looked at it through the lens of human-centered design and human-centered AI. This was really before, or at least I was aware of people talking about it in responsible AI. And that just came from our field and our tradition. And so, we started to, we were working on tactical product problems. There wasn't like a grand strategy or a grand theory. We were trying to solve product problems. And from that, we were able to extrapolate out principles or commonalities and things like this. I was talking to some people earlier this week, and I remembered that the first presentation I made that I remember was called how to build user trust in machine learning.
Mm.
And I think and I was kind of thinking about this. I was like, oh, that's funny. I put trust in the title of the very first, presentation, the very first summary that we did, and still the linchpin of the whole thing. Not saying that was a good called shot or anything, just like that was the thing that was apparent from the beginning and it remains apparent. And then responsible AI, I think, really starts to take shape as you have more voices and perspectives that came into this space, that we're looking at things more through the lens of like power and politics, and historical context and everything like that. I think of responsible AI as, if I had to try to do it the one-liner, it's the application of AI in accordance with a set of values. And so one important thing is that, not specifying a set of values is still a set of values. So we went through the whole, oh, we're just going to be neutral thing, and there's no such thing as neutrality. That's an illusion. And so you've set some kind of values there. And then I think we're still really trying to wrestle with, and we have for years, is trying to wrestle with, okay, which set of values, who gets to decide which set of values, how malleable are they? What do we do when the society or the collective desire around these values shifts? And I think it's also really, responsible AI it kind of separates itself from other AI, kind of, but not really of that. It's at the intersection of these things. So it's really at the intersection of first, culture, second, technology, and third, legislation or governance. And that's what makes it very challenging, very engaging. That's where almost all of the hardest parts people are still trying to figure out come from, and why it also attracts so many different people from so many different backgrounds.
Mhm.
Yeah. I mean, I
Just
think,
do you have an example of, like, something concrete just for listeners or viewers about, like, mm, how do you know that the thing that you're working on is responsible?
yeah, you don't like the answer is just like, you don't. And I'll kind of say why, like, because there's so much, but I don't think that's different than almost anything else anyone works on. And that's not a reason to say, keep pursuing it. So I think like anything you can say, one is that you say, we want to work on things, products, processes, whatever they might be, governance structures in a responsible way. And then you say, here's our definition of what a responsible approach would be. Now, this can vary tremendously from country to country, region to region, community to community. And so there's another question of the scope of who kind of determines what here. One of the things we just did at Meta that I was really proud of is, our team got to be a part of these community forums. And so these are attempts to use deliberative democracy approaches to AI governance. The really quick version is, instead of doing kind of what we might do in UX research, which is like a series of interviews or surveys, you actually get a demographically representative sample of your users and you educate them. So you actually, in UX research, we a lot of times don't want people to know anything before they come in, or we want them to know a very particular thing. Here we say, no, we're actually going to really educate you on a topic. And in this case, it was AI and generative AI. And then we're going to ask you some questions about how you feel like it should be used. But then we're actually going to allow you all to debate for a while and like
Oh,
mull those ideas over and kind of have back and forth and start to think deeper about these things. And then give feedback at the end about, okay, so did that change your thinking or now that you've kind of gone a little deeper? And I think it's a really interesting new set of methods that people are experimenting with.
yeah.
They're kind of pushing. And the reason I told you all that is because I think that's one of those mechanisms to get at what is responsible and for whom. Um,
Mm.
and I think a lot of the ways that we attempted before is we just didn't have the right tool or process to really do that. So we'd have
Mhm.
these appeals to authority, or people would punt and say, oh, well, we'll just, product usage will let us figure it out, or whatever it might be. But yeah, we're experimenting now with new ways to try to define responsibility in practical ways and then let the right people weigh in on the right scope on how we can apply it that way.
I actually have a question about that specifically. It was interesting as you were talking about almost AI, artificial intelligence being the incorrect name, right? So it's an augmented intelligence. It's all the knowledge comes from humans. And so if all the knowledge comes from humans in a way, then all AI is human centered, right? So
I,
depending on how you look at it.
I,
Um,
I
but I think that,
oh,
sorry.
no, I was going to say, like, I'd swear we didn't set this up. So I used to actually give this talk, because I used to give a talk that was called like human centered AI or something like that, like very generic. And I changed the title for a while, and it was called AI has always been human centered, whether we admit it or not. That's
Right.
the title of the talk for a while.
And so I think that begs the question, how do we look at this in a way that's inclusive to make sure that as we are focusing on it being just human centered, that it's representative of all of the humans? And just curious about your thoughts around that.
Yeah, I think that's the thing that always comes up too. Is they talk about, especially in the era of pre-training, is we've trained this on the entire internet. And there's a little bit of like, well, which there's a couple if you want to get really technical. And then you look at like, okay, but who's been on that internet? Like where are the traces of the data and how are we doing that? Um, and so, yeah, I think that uh, there's this whole, sorry, I like totally lost my train of thought. Will you ask your question one more time?
No, not a problem. It was just more so thinking about AI being, you focusing on human centered AI and making the note, which made me realize, oh, wow, AI, to your point, has always been human centered based on the knowledge. How do we ensure that as we're thinking about human inclusion, that it's really inclusive of all the humans?
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. I think that one of the things that is fascinating to me is actually how much this has come up for this paradigm shift in technology. So in some ways, people are looking at this and saying that AI is not being inclusive, or there are people that are excluded, or there's going to be harm. And then this is all true. And in other ways, it's the most inclusive we've ever been in a paradigm shift. So the way I put it is like, no, this was not really a consideration in the move from like desktop to web. It was kind of just understood to be a fundamentally more inclusive platform, or web to mobile, or when cloud came out. There are no conversations around this that I'm aware of at the time. And so one is, it's really interesting that it's come ahead that we even talk about this, with this tech, which I think is a good thing. It's a positive thing. I think that there's all the regular challenges here of, one is, I do still think the most fundamental is values. Because when you try to say we're going to have some kind of value alignment, and the computer scientists are talking about value alignment, and, the social psychologists are like, value alignment's really hard, even for a bunch of people to do, let alone define. And usually it happens through very complex mechanisms, like just existing in society over time, is that people figure out if they are, what their values are, and how they are aligned to them or not. So you have those challenges. You have tons of data challenges, but again, those don't feel insurmountable. And so these come from language representation on the internet, or, image representation of these things. And there are a lot of problems. Like at Google, there was great work by Courtney Heldreth and other people on skin tone recognition for the vision models, and making sure that there's equal performance across them, and all these kind of things. And so there are problems, but we also have line of sight to probably fix those ones. And so those kind of feel, they're a problem we need to fix, but it feels like we can, and we'll be able to, versus things that are, wow, humans haven't figured out how to do this since humans have been around, let alone if you introduce the machines in there. But then, I like to kind of like hand wave and go down the stack. So let's say we somehow value align magically. Let's say we somehow have all the data magically. This kind of gets back to the value alignment, but then it's like, well, what should we put it toward? So I think a big part of responsible AI in any approach is, well, what's it for? Like, what do we want to predict or automate or augment or whatever? And is it a thing that aligns with what people want out of life? There's this meme going around right now that's like, what is it? I wanted robots to do my laundry so I could, paint and make art or whatever. And instead the robots are making art and I got to do more laundry. There's, and there's part of it that's like a funny joke, and part of it's like, I believe this is a step on the path we have to take that looks pretty clunky when it comes to like image generation, video generation. But there's a big part of, what are we applying it to? Do people want that? And then, okay, let's say we do that. Values, data, we aim it at the problems people want it aimed at. Then you get into a lot of thorny questions around just deployment and like product questions. So we'll still have models that will likely have bias in them in some way. Some models are biased in ways that, another word for bias in some cases is focus. So if you say, we want to have something that, detects breast cancer or something like that, like you would probably focus it on female breast cancer before male breast cancer. Is that a bias? Kind of. But I think it's one that a lot of people would agree with. And so then you say, okay, then we do that. And then you get into all these product challenges. Do people feel in control of the AI? Do people have transparency into what it's doing? And they build a mental model. When there's an error, can they recover quickly? And all those things are responsible AI to me as well, because it's about, can everyone get the maximal benefit from something that they want to, while reducing all of the potential risks.
Something that you said earlier about, this, the way in which you're testing out the idea, right? Or testing out the tech, with community. And something that you said there that was really interesting to me is I feel like you're maybe closing the gap. But what I mean by that is that it seems to me that for a long time, technology just felt like people received it, right? Somebody else made it and then you received it. And this feels like you're creating a proximity between people and technology earlier on, or at least in the process, so that not only are they hopefully informing what it ends up being or what it is, but they also are engaging with it in a way where they feel like they're part of shaping this thing. That feels very different to me than maybe what we've seen in the past.
But I fully agree with that.
Yeah.
There's researchers, we're tapping into methods from more even distant social science fields, then because usually we pull from like, HCI or human factors or UX research kind of stuff. And we look at like community-based participatory research. He's starting to say, okay, working with communities, really before there's even a question formed, and understanding what kind of, if we said, hey, we're here to help you, one is you say, what do you want? What do you want help with? Not like, what did I decide to bring you to help you with, but what do you want help with? And then looking at, okay, how might we pivot our efforts toward that? But yeah, it's amazing to kind of see it happen, because there's no calls for community-based participatory research when I was working on cloud. Like,
Mhm.
it's more like, oh, we need to talk to some developers. Like that's about all we
Yeah.
need to do. And so I do think it's a moment though that's landing both technical progress and societal progress. So to me, it's also a moment of, why do people want to participate? And I
Mhm.
think it's because I think we crossed some Rubicon. I don't know when, but that the world just, I don't know a single person who even feels close to like feeling like they have control, like they get how the world works and they feel in control these days. It's more of this thing of like, everything feels so complex. Everything feels like it's moving so fast. And so there's a greater desire to control and to shape something, and especially something that could have very large consequences. I'm not in the like, this is the next fire crowd or whatever, but it's going to be pretty impactful. And so I get if people are like, hey, I'm tired of stuff happening without me. I want to
Yeah.
say that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and it goes
And
back to your presentation, your first presentation that you did where the word trust was there, and now here you are, decade later, seeing it play out in a very particular way.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing, in CVPR, the community based story research community is, moving at the speed of trust. Technology tends to have a thing of faster, more, go, go. And there's a tension there with how trust works. We talk a lot about like, cool, I get that the code can do that, but that doesn't work at human scale, and especially collective human scale.
Mhm.
And it's not a bug. It's not like a thing to solve. You know, I'm pretty, I think one of the most absurd arguments ever for like the crypto stuff is basically like trust is a bug that we need to solve. I just, to tell me you're not a social scientist without telling me you're not a social scientist kind of thing.
if I, to take it back to, uh, you know, data, right? Mainly because, as you said, you know, AI is about prediction. To make predictions, we need data. And if you look at responsible AI practices online, like I did a quick search, human-centered design was like the first line item for like Google's responsible AI practices. And there is also a dedicated line item for data, right? So in human-centered design, there is a line item which says engage diverse set of quote engage diverse set of users and use case scenarios. And then in uh, in the data section, again, it talks about, make sure you don't have data bias, uh, something to consider. Are you using data which is not needed? Is it sampled in a way that it represents your users? So what are some of the things like, if I'm a company, if I want to start a company today and, I'm trying to figure out, hey, what are the best, top three things I can do from a tech perspective? Um, what would you recommend for a recommendation engine?
Yeah. I mean, when it comes to data, I'm not the best person in the world to answer that, but I can give you a couple of thoughts I have. I mean, I think one is that pay for it would be my first. Is like, and I know that's really hard for startups and cash strap, but honestly, people are like, looking, and there's lots of free data sets and open source data sets out there. But one of the strongest moats people are going to have is through unique data sets. And it's the right thing to do to compensate people. Especially if they're willingly, like they know that they are there to help you train a model. That just seems like the right thing to do. I think that we're also, if you look and say, all right, the hyperscaler platforms or, Google, OpenAI, Microsoft, Meta, a couple others or Anthropic are going to exhaust the, common crawls and the big data sets. Like that's just going to be an
Mhm.
advantage unless you want to start throwing hundreds of millions of dollars at it. You're not going to, um, no, you're not going to contest. Then you need to go toward the quality angle. Like I read a paper on Hugging Face today about Fine Web. And it's really interesting how people are starting to really curate data sets to be very high quality. I think that there's another one. I might be messing up the title, but it's like because it's a play on attention is all you need. I think it's like textbooks is all you need or something like that. I might be messing up the play on the title. But again, it's like looking for these higher quality data sets that they can then be big differentiators. I would say a second one when it comes to data is just, this is old school UX stuff, is in product feedback. Are you getting signals from your users at scale in a way that helps you improve model quality over time? This could be a huge advantage to people who actually invest in that as well, and think about how are they then working with their users to improve the user experience. That becomes a pretty nice upward trajectory there. And then I don't want to gloss over this, and it's not my area of expertise, but the privacy angle is really important as well, in making sure. I think one of the challenges, though, is sometimes, there's data experimentation where you're figuring out what data do you need, how is it useful to you, and you might collect more because obviously you kind of want to oversample because then you can get rid of what you have. But to have a strong privacy story and to communicate that well to people, so that they're very clear what's happening with their data, how it's being used, and most importantly is how do they benefit from it and what are the potential risks? Like, let them make an informed decision, not through legalese or through 17 paragraphs of 17 is probably being light, 1700 paragraphs, but instead, help them make an informed decision so that they can make a choice.
We spoke in our prior meeting. You'd mentioned that there were almost schools of thought around responsible AI, and almost you made them almost sound like various tribes.
Yeah.
Do you mind laying that landscape out a little bit for our audience and
Yeah,
helping
no.
us understand that a bit?
Yeah. And the, whatever usual caveats of like, this is just my view, what I see. But, yeah, I feel like there's a few different ones. So, there's still a lot of people that are very focused on it at a technical level, and looking at it. And, I think that there used to be more of this cartoon of, well, it was a cartoon, but it was kind of true in the beginning is, oh, we're just going to like solve it. This is an engineering problem, bias in the models, responsible application, whatever it is. And, we'll work on this for a couple quarters and we'll figure it out because we always do, and I think that, I don't think that there's anybody that believes that anymore. I do think that there's some people that are really orienting toward, though, fine-grained control and understanding of models, hoping that then becomes a piece that we need. Because if you say like, okay, let's say magically we all kind of can agree on how we want or it's weird to say how we want a model to behave even, because like nobody cares how a model behaves. People care about how a model in a system behaves, and that system might be a product or it might be, a government service or something like that. But now we basically say, well, okay, if we all do agree on what we want it to, do we have the ability to make it do those things then? And so I think a lot of that work is now focused on finer granular control, transparency, understanding what's happening in the models. I think the second group then is really focused on the power and politics of AI more generally, and the AI. I don't think there's really like an AI industry just because it doesn't fit that, but it's much more concerned about who benefits, who pays, what rights, the cost of labor or the use of labor and the compensation for labor and all these things. So there's another group that really focuses there and kind of makes it RAI more about politics and power, economic power specifically. The third is more like the philosopher group that's kind of come up, which is, very like AGI focus, very like long thought piece kind of focus, what does it all mean? And kind of trying to relate it to these larger arcs. And then, it's where I'd put myself and a lot of people I work with, and more people that I think would admit it than do, is just really kind of focus on like practical trade-offs and product development. So, I still believe, or it's the story I tell myself, that like, I'm trying to make people's lives better. The way I do that is through products. The way I make products better is through user research. Like that's the chain I'm trying to push or trying to use. And so the way that I relate to it a lot these days is trying to take in all of the what's going on in the technology, the power and politics, and the philosophy groups, but then apply it in very product driven ways that are about trade offs, right? So nothing's perfect. No product is finished the first time we ever ship it. But are we thinking about trade offs and making the right choices there? There may be things where you might say, yeah, there's this potential risk of this thing happening way out there, but we think there's huge utility to people. We think there's going to be a lot of value to people. So we do want to deploy this. We want to monitor for the potential risk. We want to learn and get better and obviously minimize it as much as we can over time. But we wouldn't not launch something because there's a greater than zero risk of some potential risk in the future.
Mhm.
The other part I'll put is that it's just kind of wildly impractical because it's frozen in time. These technologies and these products make contact with humans and with society, and phenomena emerge. Everyone's a genius who can see everything in hindsight. And there's almost always somebody who can call something ahead of time. Very few people can do it consistently. But you have to kind of make contact with the world and then have systems to really rapidly evaluate, though, are issues coming up, and then have systems to rapidly take something down and change it, update it, whatever it might be when those things go wrong.
Yeah. I was thinking about something that you said reminded me of this conversation I recently had with a journalist who she kind of sat there for like 3 minutes, just like reading headlines to me about everything that people were scared about AI. And there
Mhm.
were like a gazillion headlines, right? And one of the things I'm curious about is, as you think about the evolutions in AI and also in parallel, like how responsible AI is evolving with it and the approaches, um, what do people need to know about, addressing the fear factor? Because people are very scared that this thing AI is taking over their world.
Yeah, it's yeah. I I mean, one is I really I hear that and I get that, and um, I think that I think that the hype is not good. Obviously, it's in the weird thing of like I think it's going to be a massively beneficial set of technologies on a long term for people. And I think it's wildly overhyped right now. And I think that there's a lot of people that take advantage of that. There are many kind of cottage industries that have popped up to take advantage of that.
Mhm.
And there are some in the RAI space as well. If you, not that they have, but like, if a boogeyman is conjured and then you say, I have, the anti boogeyman spray, you can probably sell some anti-boogeyman spray.
Mm.
Um, um, I do think though that there's a few things that do. I wish we were worried. I wish the proportion we were worried about more tip toward them. So I'm in the. I don't think about like AGI or any of that stuff like at all. I don't know. It's not. Maybe this isn't the venue to get into it, but don't think about it at all. I do think that there's a few places also where, I think about the community forum and things like that we did too, where we do know that when we talk to people about more like practical realities of AI and they have space to discuss it, they actually feel a lot better. That's not like a huge shock,
Mhm.
but like it makes sense. Um, I do think it is important though, is when people know more and they get to talk about it more, they feel better about it, more general. That's a good sign. Um, there are some things though that I do think that we should be thinking about more than we have. I think the biggest near term risk is around misinformation and misinformation detection. Um, we have fakes that are already here. I won't even call them deep fakes because there's deep fakes, there's shallow fakes, there's all kinds of fakes. It was kind of wild. I was actually just scrolling today and I came upon one. It's like this thing on TikTok and it had like 0 views. And I was like, oh God, I'm like one of the first people to see this thing. And it was like clearly this like deep fake. scam thing where it was a combination of like Bill Gates' voice talking about like how he's going to help people out and you click this link, get $10,000
Oh gosh.
and they'd done like a little manipulation of the mouth and stuff like that. So I do have concerns there, but it's at a particular intersection. So I think people are really worried about the like really egregious fake that goes wild. And I'm less about that because I think that those will be detected. Kind of like security threats. The overt trying to take the castle security threat is not nearly as dangerous as the covert one.
Mm.
And so I worry that we'll have fakes or misinformation. Misinformation has obviously been around for forever. AI powered misinformation that really aims at decisions where there's a very small margin. So it's very hard to flip, 80% of people are voting this way on an issue and 20% this way. It's very hard to like flip that entirely. When you're at that, like, 49, 51%, if you're at that margin, there's a lot more susceptibility there. I think the other one is then just the interaction of time, in the fallibility of human memory. And
Mm.
so what I worry about a lot in a lot of having human attention consumed. So what I worry about is that they don't have to be that good, but if you were to see some fakes or some misinformation or something enough, and then you had over time or enough time went by, and then we factor in, the fallibility of human memory, it starts to just seed feelings in everyone. You're
Mm.
like, I don't trust that person. I can't exactly explain to you why, but I don't know. There's something about them. And then you're like, I think I saw something. Didn't they like do something? They did something shady like a couple months ago, didn't they? And everyone's like, oh yeah, I think I heard that too. Like that's the thing that I'm worried about at the margin. Because I think that is the easiest vector.
Mm.
Almost that sentiment manipulation almost, right? Like long
Yeah.
term.
Yeah. It's not this like, oh, we're going to seed this fact that people are going to believe.
Mm.
It's that we're going to seed this. It's not even like an emotion. We're like going to seed a vibe, seed like a really low level, just like kind of feeling about something. And then that will perpetuate enough. Again, it's not going to swing massively, but at the margin, it will be very effective.
Mhm.
Um, I think another one is looking at, we touched on this already, but really looking at performance of any kind of model within a system across any non-English languages, any places where we don't have nearly as much image representation to train like image models, like all these things. So that's like a whole thing, and I think people still wrestle with like how do you prioritize? And right now it's kind of prioritized, frankly, through product adoption. So like that's one of our big levers. And inside of a big company, you'd say, all right, what's our international expansion strategy? And you look at where you have users and where you might have, additional sales or additional time on platform or whatever, and you focus there. Um, I don't know, that I don't know if, the pros and cons of that. I mean, obviously there's a lot of pros and cons of that. But it's probably not like the best way to focus on driving that adoption. And along those lines too, I think that there needs to be more decentralization. I'm very bullish on open source models. People can, somebody listening is like, but you just said you were worried about misinformation. I know. And then I still think that's probably a better solution to it. And then I think the third one is really around, you know, I won't even say employment because I'm not worried about employment. Everything we've seen to date suggests that employment shifts. It doesn't, go away. There won't be the destruction of jobs. Some jobs will go away, new jobs will come up. But there is something a little different that I am concerned about, or at least I just can't see how it works out yet. And that's really around like reskilling, adaptation. And then one of the things it seems like we're doing is in some places taking away the bottom couple rungs of the ladder. So we're like, oh, you don't have to do this grunt work anymore. Or sometimes AI is described as like infinite interns. It's like, yeah, but an intern is when you kind of learn how the job works. Or like that crummy low level job is how you kind of figure everything out and start to build the skill for the next thing. So like, how do I do that? If I don't have the earlier job. And then is it pushed more to like education programs? And, there's an angle and, be suspicious of anything that's like, oh, it's AI is the solution. But, there's this thing of like, or do we have AI assist augmented education that helps people? But I don't know if you can like I don't know if you can AI educate your way past a bunch of practical experience. And then along there, what's really interesting to me as well is, we've seen some early studies that suggest that AI push up, productivity, output, creativity on across a lot of domains, but they tend to push the lower, like the bottom half of performance up. So, if you have a distribution of performance in a particular task that will take like, the bottom, or the second lowest like quartile and like move them up a bit.
Yeah.
I think that's good, but I'm also really interested in, I haven't heard nearly as much as like AI pushing the top 5% of performers even higher. And a lot of times that's where like disproportionate value is created. And so I would actually like to see that, I can see some, I can hear some pushback in my head already around that, but I do actually think that's an important frontier to look at of not only how can you kind of elevate, human, performance and satisfaction, all these things, but also how can you raise the ceiling as well? And can we augment people who are already doing quite well, to do even more, to even have even bigger breakthroughs, greater productivity, whatever, write even better music.
So, just given everything that you've laid out for us, where do you want to see the world of responsible AI go in 5 years? Like, if you're arriving at year 5 now,
Yep.
what does it look like?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, I was thinking of a couple things. I mean, I think that I would like to see way more of the conversation around trade-offs and around potential utility versus or potential value versus potential risks.
Mhm.
Feel like there's started to be kind of like polarization on both ends of that spectrum that I'd like to go away. And by that, I mean the AI zealots that are like, it's amazing. It's going to be great. It's going to fix everything. And then the people that are, kind of like dunking on every time something goes wrong and
Mhm.
being like, look, see, I told you it's worthless. It's like, well, it's neither of those things, I mean, and so I'd really like it to come down from that. Although that feels intertwined with, this moment of polarization more broadly. But I'd like us to talk about, um, these trade-offs, value, potential risk, and then ground it in data. Like, what are we seeing? Because there is a lot, especially in the REI space, that kind of like speculates on potential harms. And it's like, okay, that is good. I do want to think about that. And we do want to like take steps to prevent that if we can. But also, are we focusing on the biggest issues? Because this field is very expansive. The field rewards a lot of people coming up with a new risk we hadn't thought of before.
Mm.
Um, and I would say it does that more so than somebody coming along and going, hey, remember that risk we were really worried about a couple years ago? I figured out a way for us to probably not solve it, but like take a big dent out of it. I'd like to see that. I mean, I'd like to see kind of zero talk on the AGI stuff. I don't know. And it's just not my thing. And I think it totally distracts from the present day challenges and like, it's fun, whatever. I read sci-fi. It's fun, but it's not like where we should be spending our serious time.
So can you tell me what AGI stands for? Because I missed that.
Oh, it's funny. I can't tell if this is a bit or not. Artificial general intelligence, like the AI that's so smart it does everything. Sorry, God, I envy
Thanks.
you. I envy you. I wish I didn't know what that acronym meant. Um, uh, yeah, a couple other things. Sorry, I definitely have a list. So all those are, what I just described is more like product stuff and discourse. I think one of the other things I'd really like to see a lot more is actually a lot more integration with policy and people working on policy. But with that, I'd really like to see more experimentation in policy. So policy tends to work at such a different pace layer than product, and they will never come together unless they kind of can meet in the middle somewhere on some things. And I actually think one of the things that's really interesting is some groups are starting to do this. They're basically like designing almost like we would a product. So they'd like kind of design a policy, have some companies try to uh, use it for a while, get feedback, and adapt it. And I think there's a lot there. I can't. All this still is, almost nothing I've even mentioned yet has anything to do with the technology. So obviously, I want the technology to get better, and that comes a lot of control and interpretability. And then really like at those low level technical guarantees around privacy, around use of data, around what, a model or a model within a system can do. And, having it in the code beats just about anything else. And I think the last thing is just for people is just, we've been talking about it for years and we're still not there. It's just around transparency and control. Do people know what the systems are doing in a way that they can understand and can make informed decisions about? And then do they have the control that they want to control? I think a lot of it's going to come back to that. And to tie it all together, I think transparency and control are just deeply intertwined with trust.
I love it when it all comes together.
Yeah, full circle there, Jess. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. You've given us so much deep expertise and knowledge, and lots of things to think about, I think. And what I love about the way that you've shared what you have is that I think it's going to give people a lot to wrestle with. I don't think what you've presented to us is like hey, here's the answer to X, Y, and Z, but rather really like here's the plethora of things that we're dealing with. And hopefully everybody sees themselves as hopefully they see themselves as part of that wrestling. And if not, then hopefully they'll try to be part of it because I think it's important.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of this is just, these are tensions between things.
Exactly. Yeah.
That are really challenging. And, believe me, they're really smart people trying to work on this. If there were simple answers, we would have found them by now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But we'll love to have you on again. And for now, we're going to sign off and we're looking forward to a part 2 at some point.
I'll come back for your 100th show. How about
that? Sounds great.
Awesome.
Thanks, Jess.
Jess, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we're into our jam session post talking to Jess. All right, where do we get started? Shadan, I feel like you're burning. I feel it. I feel it in your eyes. I'm seeing like thoughts coming out of your eyes. Tell me, what do you think?
Listen, it was pretty incredible. I felt like I just learned so much from him, and I think you nailed it when you said that the way he presented the data and the information was really as almost a juxtaposition of multiple tensions and things that folks are struggling with to define. And so that concept, that term that he used around just policy experimentation, for example, right? And talking about how policy is such a laggard as compared to the forwardness of product development and that need for those two things to come together to better integrate so that we can get the products in the trustworthy manner that we need them delivered. So that's what you're seeing, the smoke and the gears turning around all of those tensions.
Yeah, that's awesome. Ashish, what about you? What was going on for you while you were listening to him?
So for me, I like the way he gave a couple of examples on things that I'd never thought about. You always think about these scenarios like doomsday or overt scenarios, right? So as he said, right, maybe it's not like the big misinformation campaign that you need to worry about. Maybe it's like the subtle one which goes on for like months, right? And
Mhm.
suddenly you have this seed in your head, and it's just you don't remember where it came from, but it's there and it's enough to, let's say, for example, make you vote one way or the other, or make you think one way or the other. So that was an interesting concept. And then also in a similar vein, where he said, in terms of employment, everybody's worried about, oh, it will come and take my job. And then, which might be true in some cases, but we always think, hey, there's this, if I'm good at my job, then it will never really get get smart enough to do my job. But like how he mentioned, where okay, it might not take like the top, I don't know, 50%, but there's that the bottom rung which might be impacted. And for people, that's important, right? It's
Yeah.
important because you get that from experience. So those are the things that were like interesting. And of course, the way he brought it together at the end with like transparency and control and how that builds trust, that was just like a nice way to wrap the conversation. So those are the things that stood out to me.
Yeah, I felt based on what two of you are saying, even the one thing I thought he did really well was to, I think, really delineate where is AI actually having an impact, and where
Mm.
could it have impact, or where is it not having impact, and how do we deal with all of that? Because I think what's happening right now, at least from a public perspective, is that there is really, I think, very hard to have perspective on AI because it just seems like this thing that's coming for you, or that is everywhere and it's integrated and you can't see it and you don't know how to deal with it. And why is this, And so I just feel like he did such a good job of sort of distilling, like, where is it actually working right now? Like, where are some of those places? And where are the tensions, to Shadan's your point, right? Where are the tensions that we have to deal with in order to make it work better and for everyone and for more people? And where do we not need to worry? Like, where is it just like sort of, let's not spend our time there, not because it's not a thing, but because it's not where we need to be spending our time and energy. Like when he was talking about AGI, like I'm sure there's lots of people who might disagree with him right on that. But irrespective, I think what he was trying to do is, I think, give us a more sort of level-headed approach to this. And I really appreciated that. And I almost felt like what he did really well, that I don't often hear a lot of people do, is he kind of allowed you to kind of take a bird's eye view of it,
Right.
right?
Hmm.
Here are the pieces of the puzzle. And can we all just lift ourselves up a little bit and look at the puzzle and say, okay, where are the pieces, but also where are we in relationship to those pieces, right? I think
Right.
as people in the world of technology too, I think it's easy also to kind of get, sucked into like a narrow perspective or point of view on something, or to like sort of think of it as this way or that way. But I think he did such an excellent job of helping us see the bigger picture.
Couldn't agree more. It was a great conversation, and happy to have this one in the annals of this amazing podcast. So great job on the guest.
Any closing thoughts?
Just super excited. I feel like each one of these episodes helps me to just develop a different understanding, a more broad understanding of technology in general and its impact and implications on not just myself but the world. And again, in particular, this latest episode with Jess, really just understanding some of the tensions that exist and the questions that I probably hadn't articulated enough to myself to begin to grapple with, and
Mm.
just how powerful that is. So it was
Mhm.
great.
Yep. And when it comes to, I was reading up, and there's this human-centered design principle in the responsible AI principle section. There was this line item which says, give people, instead of giving one answer, try to give three answers, right? And let people choose the right answer for them. So I kind of feel like that's what Jess did for us. And it was like not one answer,
Mm.
it was a set of 50. So
Right.
so really, like, that came to my mind when he was like talking. So yeah.
Yeah, and
Sweet.
I think that, like, the whole idea of agency is really important in this. Like, it's easy to feel like technology is taking you over, like I keep saying, this sort of sense that you get from the outside world. but it's also important to feel like, where do you have agency in it? And I think that maybe what he was trying to do, whether he said it or not, is that we actually have agency. The question is, where do we have agency and how do we act on that? And so I'm excited to see like how, people take this episode and wrestle with that question for themselves. I'm definitely going to do that walking away out of this. And so I think it'll set us up for even more interesting conversations to come.
Can't wait.
All right. The best co-hosts ever. Thank you very much. And we'll be meeting again soon.
See you next time.
Take care.
Bye.